So apparently the richest country in Asia is this tiny little nation with a population roughly just the size of Chicago. The entire country is basically just one city, yet it is one of the richest countries on the entire planet. Its GDP per capita is on par with iconic countries like Switzerland and Qatar. So allow me to introduce my country, Singapore. It's been a while since I started this channel, and I figured why not make a video about my own country even though it's not strictly East Asian. As a Southeast Asian country, the fact that Singapore managed to pull itself out of poverty so quickly and become so insanely rich that its GDP per capita now significantly surpasses other Asian giants like Japan, South Korea, and China is nothing short of a miracle. Yet, despite all this, Singaporeans rarely flex about their wealth. Chances are you've probably never met a Singaporean who drives fancy cars or goes on luxurious yacht trips. And you also rarely hear Singaporeans bragging about how easy their lives are. And that's because, well, it's not easy. The dark reality of living in Nope, that's actually not the direction this video is going to take. When it comes to Singapore topics, there are two leagues of opinions. One is the complainers. These are the people who only mention the negative sides of living in Singapore, such as the high cost of living, hot and humid temperature alternating with cold aircon indoors, which makes for the perfect recipe for getting sick, etc. Some would even go as far as to call Singapore a scam and warn people to not come here. And the other league is the glazers. These are the people who will defend Singapore at all costs. And of course, there are people in the middle like me who think Singapore, just like any other country, has its pros and cons. So here's my 2 cents opinion. I think that Singapore is a great country, maybe even the best country in the world if you like a particular type of lifestyle, the NPC lifestyle. Now, the word NPC nowadays almost always carries negative connotations, especially in today's internet culture. It usually refers to someone who is a nobody with no independent motives and is merely serving as a background noise for the main characters. But when I say that Singaporeans live the NPC lifestyle, I really mean it in a neutral way. Because think about it, in today's global environment where everything is in shambles and people are struggling to make a basic living, is being an NPC really that bad? Like, y'all like to complain that Singapore treats its citizens like employees rather than real people, but isn't that already a huge privilege? Many countries treat their citizens like slaves or cannon foders. At least being an NPC means you have safety, stability, and don't have to worry about making ends meet. So I'm gonna dive into this NPC lifestyle and I will try painting a full picture. First, the pros. The best part about being an NPC is stability and safety. You don't have to worry about getting attacked or going bankrupt or facing big life failures. And in Singapore, one of the biggest promises of this country is stability. As long as you work hard and live wisely, you're almost guaranteed a stable life. Good disposable income, affordable healthcare and education, affordable housing if you're a Singaporean citizen, and the country is also extremely safe and efficient. Now, a lot of people like to complain about the high cost of living in Singapore, which is a fair point, but I actually think that compared to many other advanced economies, the cost of living in Singapore really isn't that high. First, you gotta remember that the median salary in Singapore is pretty high, almost twice as much as Japan's median salary, especially considering that Singapore has much less tax. So if you're a foreigner traveling to both Japan and Singapore, it's easy to draw the conclusion that Japan is cheaper, but hey, Singaporeans earn more. And when it comes to everyday expenses like food and transportation, I would argue that Singapore is a lot cheaper than many Western economies such as Canada, where I currently live. Eating out in Singapore nowadays, you can still easily get a full meal for just about $5 to $8 in the hawker centers, which I don't think you can get anywhere in Canada now. Just yesterday, I had this standard meal at a food court and it cost me a whopping $17 for a food court meal. It wasn't like I was dining at a restaurant. And then let's talk about the most important living expense, housing. And this is where a lot of people's frustration with Singapore comes from, because rent is undeniably expensive in Singapore, almost on par with New York York and Hong Kong rent prices. As of 2025, the average price for renting a one-bedroom apartment outside the city center is about 3,000 Singaporean dollars, let alone near the city center. And even renting out a small bedroom inside a shared flat, so like you're sharing the bathroom and kitchen with someone else, can easily cost you over 1K if you're living near the city center. And it's because of this that you'd often hear people say, yo, Singapore is not worth it, just go to Malaysia. However, this crazy rent situation is what the foreigners are experiencing, which does not represent the housing situation for local Singaporeans, because the majority of Singaporeans don't rent. They own a place, or more precisely, they live with their parents until they're able to own a home. Singapore has one of the highest home ownerships in the world, with more than 80% of its citizens owning and living in these government-built public housing units called the HDB flats. So these are the sort of cookie-cutter apartments you see everywhere in Singapore. And yes, I know that in the past few years with inflation, prices of these public housing have gone up and they've become much less affordable compared to pre-COVID years. But that's a problem affecting pretty much the entire world now. And I will still say that compared to most other major global cities like New York, London, Toronto, Hong Kong, Singapore's public housing units are still relatively affordable for its citizens, especially through the buying brand new build-to-order route. Like, these prices are already looking pretty affordable even before the government subsidies, especially compared to where I live now. If you live in Canada, you definitely know what I mean. And not to mention, the median Canadian salary is lower than their Singaporean counterpart. And the reason how Singapore achieved this impressive home ownership is all thanks to our world-renowned policy, aka the home for every family policy raised by our founding father back in the 60s. He once famously said, quote, "I resolved to enable every household to own its own home. If we were going to get the people to take national service seriously, I could not ask their sons to fight and die for the properties of the wealthy." Now, whether he said this out of genuine care for his citizens or just to ensure political stability for his regime is up to debate. But there's no doubt about it that it worked and people are grateful for it. In fact, people are grateful for a lot of things that the founding father did, despite his regime being technically a dictatorship. Now, there are a lot of videos on YouTube talking about how Singapore is the only successful dictatorship, and they have a point. The Singaporean government is incredibly efficient, maybe even the most efficient bureaucracy in the world, and you can see this reflected in every fabric of the country. The city is insanely well designed. Every inch of land is used to its full potential. As a city with one of the highest population densities in the world, it miraculously avoids common issues that plague other dense cities such as overcrowding and terrible traffic jams, all thanks to its ultra-efficient city planning. The country is also incredibly safe, like safe even by Asian standards, partially due to its world-famous strict law system, where you can get severely punished for offenses considered minor elsewhere. I'm sure you've seen some of these signs on the streets. I'm sure you've also heard of the world-famous caning practice in Singapore. As a result, certain issues that you normally encounter in other countries are simply non-existent in Singapore. For example, in my entire existing memory, I've never seen or heard of anyone doing drugs, like not even a single person. So in terms of safety and stability, Singapore may just look like heaven, which begs the question, what is there to possibly complain about? And that leads to the second part of this video, the downsides. To be fair, I wouldn't even call it downside because everyone is looking for something different in life. So it all depends on what you want. If you think that having a job and being able to afford things is already a huge blessing in today's global environment and everyone should be grateful to be an NPC, then there really is no downside to the Singaporean lifestyle. However, if you think that life is more than just existing, going to work, repeat and rinse, then the Singaporean lifestyle may not be for you because this is not a place where you can slack off and chill. It's also not a country that gives people second chances or allows people to explore diverse life options. Now, there's a common misconception going around that Singapore is a welfare state because it has affordable healthcare and education. But that's not really true. Singapore is not a welfare state. In fact, the founding father himself was very much against the European-style welfare system. He basically believed it would make people lazy, and laziness is a sin in this country by design. See, when Singapore got kicked out from Malaysia, it had nothing to start off with. Literally nothing. No resources, no international backing, no financial aid. So to a large degree, this country simply couldn't afford to slack off off, and everyone had to work hard to pull itself out of poverty. So I don't think it's fair to give all the credits to Lee. Yes, his policies were effective, but it was the collective efforts of ordinary citizens that ultimately led to Singapore's success. What this would entail is that there's really no room for YOLOing. Life can feel like walking on a tight rope. One small mistake and you're out. Competition starts when you're still in elementary school, because the type of elementary school you go to determines the kind of middle school you will go. And the type of middle school you go to determines the caliber of high school you will end up in, and so on and so forth. And if you ask, when is the end? When are we finally gonna make it? Well, there is no end. It's exactly like the NPCs. You simply transition from one task to another task and keep going for as long as the game needs you, with university being the first milestone. Speaking of universities, did you know that Singaporean universities are the highest rated universities in Asia? And did you know why? It's because these universities are meticulously designed to cater to the rating systems, just like how many things in this country are meticulously designed to cater to some form of external evaluation matrix. Again, speaking of the NPC vibe. And once you're out of schools and you enter the workforce, you're not given much room to breathe either. To be fair, the work-life balance in Singapore is definitely not as bad as its East Asian neighbors like Japan, China, South Korea, but I cannot exactly say it's much better. Compared to most Western countries, Singapore's working culture is still pretty intense and competitive. And you gotta remember that local Singaporeans often have to compete with global talents in the workforce, as Singapore is, well known for being this premier global hub for international businesses. So you're not competing with some average Joes from Kentucky. Instead, you're competing with the best and the brightest minds. Okay, now some of you may say, but I am ambitious and I don't mind the grind. Will Singapore work for me? Now, this is where things get tricky. If you are really ambitious, like you want to become the next big name in tech, the next Steve Jobs, and you want to start your own startup, Singapore is actually not the ideal place for that. Despite how modern and sharp the skyscrapers may look, Singapore is actually not that entrepreneurial. Most people have no intentions of starting their own business or starting anything on their own in general, largely due to the risk-averse mentality that most people grow up with and this deeply ingrained fear of making mistakes. Now, Asian Boss made a really good video on this topic, and I highly recommend that you check it out. So if you are entrepreneurial, I think you have a much better chance in places like the US. As a result, Singaporeans can find themselves squeezed in this really awkward position whereby they're not really able to relax and chill like the Europeans could. Yet they're also not really able to innovate and think outside of the box like Silicon Valley could. And to add on to this topic, this overall lack of career options and the fear to lose mentality have given Singapore the reputation of being this boring and monotone place. Everyone lives in the same cookie-cutter apartments, eat similar food in similar hawker centers, go to work in similar skyscrapers. There's also not a lot of diversity across different regions, and even the temperature is exactly the same every single day. To aliens, this must look like the most NPC-ish country on earth. And on a personal note, it wasn't until I moved and lived abroad that I realized that life can be more than that. And it was absolutely eye-opening. Like here in Canada, I've met people who just dropped out of high school and decided to become underground musicians, or people who took not just one gap year, but 2 gap years to figure out what they want in life and somehow still be okay. These are options that are completely unthinkable to the average Singaporean. And the unique geography of this country further adds on to this monotone lifestyle. See, in most countries, if you've had enough of the cities and the grind and you want to take a break, you can always retreat to a smaller city or the countryside. But in Singapore, there is nowhere to retreat to. There is no nature, and the entire country is just this one city. Behind the tall buildings, there are only more tall buildings. So from a pure physical point of view, it could feel suffocating at times. So the question is not whether the Singaporean lifestyle is good or bad. It's simply whether it's the kind of life that suits you. And that concludes this video. Thanks for watching.